Dr. Paul Kengor joins us again. He is a poli-sci professor at Grove City College and Catholic author, and we're very grateful to have you back on the program, Dr. Paul Kengor.
Thanks, Joe. How are you?
Praise be to God, I am alive, and that counts. How are you?
Good. I'm alive, too.
There you go. We're already starting the day well.
Yes, right.
Praise be to Jesus. I want to talk about fascism. It seems to be one of those words that gets tossed out a lot now by talking heads, commenters everywhere. I love how they try to use the word like fascistic. Like they throw these different variations around and they sound so informed and intelligent. And I wonder if you might start by just defining what is fascism. And then I'm curious, are we actually seeing fascism on the rise in America, Dr. Paul Kengor?
Well, that's a good question, Joe. And they tend, and I'll say, they by people on the left, political left, they want to put fascists on the right, and so by the right, they want to try to identify it with conservatives. But if you kind of scale out that sort of economic spectrum that that we saw in Poli-Sci 101 courses, right? And economic control, government control. Fascism is about government control, and in fact, the kind of prototype for fascists were the Nazis, and Nazi was shorthand for National Socialist German Workers' Party. Anything with Socialist and Workers' Party in the title, sounds like a party that's on the left. And Hitler and his stormtroopers, they were all about massive government control, not just on things from literature to music, but also the economy. Hitler had this kind of infamous quote, inflation, why do I have to worry about inflation? I have my stormtroopers to take care of inflation, right? So it's about big government control, and Mussolini is the other famous fascist in Italy. Of course, it was Mussolini and the Italians who teamed up with the Japanese and the Germans, Nazis in World War II. And Mussolini was actually a Marxist. He was a Marxist socialist, and socialism, according to Marxist-Leninist theory, is the final transitionary step before you get to full-blown communism. So that's really where it's coming from. But people on the political left, progressives, liberals, they've succeeded wildly in tagging people on the right, conservatives, with this label fascism, and it's one of those terms, frankly, like racism, that they wielded and thrown around so recklessly that it's lost its meaning. And if I always tell people on the left, the way you guys toss these words around, when the real McCoy comes along someday, no one's going to believe you, right? You say, well, you call it him and her and him and her a fascist, a racist, and everything else. Why should we believe you now? And but they abuse it. They really do abuse the term.
I also think about the cooperation between public and private entities, right? Government and private corporations are cooperating together. I mean, even in Schindler's List, a movie that I actually, really liked, it was clear that he was using that cooperation as a means by which to try to save some of the Jews. But we're seeing it here in America. I mean, just this week, the John Durham report came out over the weekend, which should have been a major bombshell. I mean, we're talking about parallels to Watergate here, and it's almost not covered at all in the media, let alone all the COVID information. You can't talk on social media. We get labeled and stricken all the time for mis, dis, and malinformation. Now it's a DHS a security threat memo that if you give out mis, dis, and malinformation, you could be reported. I mean, it seems like there is a cooperation here between big government and private entities. Dr. Paul Kengor, what say you?
Yeah, it's really extraordinary. And when I saw the details of the Durham report, and I guess it started with a motion that he filed in a federal court in D.C. last Friday, I thought, wow, this is a giant story. This is what Donald Trump said. He claimed that the Hillary Clinton campaign was spying on him at Trump Tower, and it appears to confirm exactly that. And I'll tell you right now, Joe, it's not going to get any coverage in the mainstream press. It's just not. And it's one of those deals where I told people back in November 2020, they could have on video, some union guy somewhere in Pittsburgh or Philadelphia flipping a switch to flip 10 million votes in the 2020 election with a big grin on his face, and it wouldn't make any difference. But CNN wouldn't cover it. I mean, even if you did find like 100% absolute proof of massive election fraud that flipped the whole thing, they would just ignore it.
Yeah.
And then you would have Google and Twitter and everybody else jumping on anybody that mentioned it to be labeled misinformation, and that would be the end of it. So it's really enormously frustrating, and for us as Catholics, it's one of those moments where about the only thing we could do is take solace in our faith. And just kind of step back and say, all right, God, it's your world, right? I don't know what else I can do about this. I could complain about it. I could tell people about it, but this behemoth of big tech, working with really one party, one political ideology, has led to an enormous censorship and control of information. We've seen it with COVID as well.
What about What about Hershey's? I mean, Hershey's was laying off their employees and citing Pope Francis in their argument to fire their own employees who refused to get vaccinated. I mean, we talk about relying on your faith. Well, many people are, and they're losing their job. And these private corporations who are now not being pressed by the federal government, not being fined, not being required by OSHA, thanks to the Supreme Court, and they're still willfully and doing it all on their own.
Yeah, I remember where I was. I was in Paso Robles, California, and we were there visiting old friends. Bill Clark, who I passed away in 2013. I wrote his biography, and his family is still there. And we were struggling with how we were going to write a religious appeal for my daughter for college. She was going back to college in late August, and we had laid out by quoting the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith and all these different statements about freedom of conscience, and how quoting even the bishops on how she as a Catholic cannot be forced to take a vaccine against her will. And we went to a coffee shop, and I pulled up, I think it was National Catholic Register, and I looked at the headline, and it was about a statement from Pope Francis on vaccines. And I read that, and I thought, and I told my wife and my daughter, I said, we're sunk. He just absolutely killed us.
Yeah.
He just pulled the rug out from under us. What he just said, everyone has a moral obligation to get the vaccines. This is liberal Catholics are going to jump on this. They're going to use this to reject Catholic religious appeals. In fact, the governor of the state of New York, Kathy Hochul, who has said, I think the last time I did your show, Joe, we talked about her welcoming all the women of Texas to come to abortion, to come to New York for abortions. She cites Pope Francis for her vaccine mandate.
Yeah. I want to ask you about if you caught AOC's comments this week. She was here in our great state, the Republic of Texas, and she was bragging about how the state's going to flip blue, which is a distinct possibility, by the way. That would upset a lot, I would argue, because there's a lot of effort to do so here. But she's also hinting at, in the next 10 years, in her worldview, she thinks democracy will be dead completely. Now, she blames that on all kinds of people like Republicans and white nationalists and all of that. But what do you think about that and AOC's comments? Do you think that she's just bolstering here, or do you think she is hinting at something that we should be paying attention to?
Well, that democracy is another one of those words that they use in that way. In fact, I'm right now working on a manuscript for 10 books on Bella Dodd.
Oh, wow.
She was the famous ex-communist and converted to the Catholic faith through Fulton Sheen, and she said in her Senate testimony in 1953, talking about communists and socialists, she said they always use this word democracy. Democracy democracy, democracy, democracy. And Vladimir Lenin used the word democracy. He said, we favor democracy. And he said, what do we mean by democracy? We mean equality. And as Bella Dodd put it, she said, when they talk about democracy, they don't say this, but they mean what they call economic democracy, right? Because America is not a democracy; it's a representative republic. So this is another one of those key phrases, right? It's the idea that you could have the founders of the Soviet Union hailing democracy. Well, we think of democracy in America. We think of Madison, Jefferson, Washington, Adams. One man, one woman, one vote, freedom of speech, freedom of press. That's what they're not. They're talking about equality, economic democracy. So this idea, you hear things like what you say, like, how are they going to end democracy? I don't get it, right? What does that even mean? They don't really tell you what they mean by it. And remember, her party, she's less a member of the Democratic Party than she is the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, and which calls itself, correctly so, the largest socialist organization in the United States. So go there and see how they define democracy. But she said in her comments about Texas that the key is to unionize the state, and she's exactly right. And the Democrats learned that if they can get mass public sector unionization, the teachers unions, the SEIU, Service Employees International Union, AFSCME, the American State, Federal, Municipal, County Employees Union. These are not traditional private sector unions. I'm from Pittsburgh, right? We're not really dealing anymore. The typical union guy is not a steel worker, not a coal miner. The typical union person is a teacher or somebody in county or state or federal government. And once they can unionize those groups, they become mass mobilization efforts for the Democratic Party. So she's if they can unionize as much as possible in a state like Texas, like they did in California, then they do have a good chance of tipping it. I think really, Joe, the difference here are Hispanic voters who are by faith as Catholics, by culture, by tradition, much more conservative, and they're anti-communist, they're anti-socialist. So I think the key for Republicans politically is to get those people on the Republican side, and I think they can do it through, if they ran for president, people like Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio. But that's a big battle, and if Texas becomes a Democratic state, the Republicans will never win the presidency ever again. I mean, that'll be lights out. I mean, this will be a one-party country for the next 100 years if that happens.
It's funny that you bring that up, Dr. Kengor, because a couple weeks ago I traveled to El Paso from Houston to attend the March for Life in El Paso, and it was a kind of a shock to me because it is a very Mexican area. There's of course, it's literally right across the border. You can look to your left and you see Mexico, but at the actual March for Life rally, there were almost no. There were some Mexicans that were there, some Hispanics that were there, but in general, it was not. And I spoke to a number of the people there, and they said, a lot of the Mexicans here are pro-life, but they refuse to ever support the Republican Party. They refuse to support the pro-life politicians because they are Democrats. For some reason, they refuse to move an inch from that position, and it's kind of mind-boggling to me. What is your analysis of this situation? Like, how is it the case that the Mexican people, especially those who came from different countries, you see Cubans are a very different case. Cubans tend to vote against the Democrat Party, recognizing socialism, but people usually from Mexico and other places in South America tend to vote Democrat. How is that cohesive?
Well, and we've seen it for a long time with Black Americans too, who for the longest time, and I say this as a political scientist, right, who studied these voting trends, the largest church-going demographic in America were Black Americans for a long time, and they were the only church-going demographic that voted against their faith politically. So you typically church attendance, people that attend church usually vote Republican over Democrat by almost 2-1. And the one exception to that were Black Americans who voted Democrat over Republican like 8-2, 9-1. So just a complete flip. And I think we're seeing that with Mexican voters as well, and also Latino voters generally. And you're right, the one exception are definitely Cuban voters who in Florida, places like Florida. And it reminds me too, bring this back to unions. I mean, my family, Western Pennsylvania, my grandmother, they were Italian Catholics, and they voted as their union told them to vote, which was for the Democrats. And I remember we would have these family arguments over politics, and my grandmother would be defending, arguing for Ted Kennedy, right, or Bill Clinton, or and my father and the others would say, they don't agree with you on anything, right, on anything, and she would just get angry and just walk into that booth and just pull the lever for the D. It's just simply what they did, almost out of blind faith. So I don't know. It takes a lot to change that, which is why you might need for president somebody in 2024, somebody like a Ted Cruz or a Marco Rubio, not somebody like Donald Trump. Trump did well with Latino voters in 2020. It was a surprise, but you need somebody who can do a lot better than he did.
Dr. Kengor, I remember in 2016 sitting at my kitchen table, and this is when I was a Democrat. I sat down and I thought, wow, it looks like Trump's going to get elected, and I had bought into this mainstream media narrative that there was going to be blood in the streets, and I was going to get lynched tomorrow, and all this kind of crazy stuff. And I'm just thinking about the Durham report, and although it's one aspect of private enterprise, how does mainstream media become accountable? Looking at the Durham report and the accusations of Russian collusion that cost Americans millions of dollars in tax dollars to investigate it. How does media become accountable in 2022?
Yeah, it's a good question. I really don't know. I mean, I wish I could give a simple solution, simple answer to this. And what makes it worse too is that if CNN doesn't cover it and MSNBC doesn't cover it, and by cover I don't mean just mentioning it a couple times.
Right.
I mean like drilling down and focusing on it, like they would if it was, if it applied to the other side. Mm-hmm. But then also what makes it worse is you've got just a giant segment of American voters out there who only watch CNN and MSNBC, who won't turn on Fox. Or, I mean, I get up in the morning, I check a dozen different websites. I check CNN and I check Fox. I check both. But most people, I'd say, on the other side, they don't look at both, so they actually don't even know about this. So when their big tech search engine or whatever labels it misinformation, they just assume it's misinformation. I wrote a piece a couple weeks ago about natural immunity and the NCAA now recognizing natural immunity for college students, and I got this email from this former Presbyterian pastor accusing me of peddling, quote, dangerous misinformation, unquote.
Unbelievable.
And he told me, he said, there's not a single study out there that supports what you're saying, that natural immunity is effective. And I got angry with him, and I said, you don't know what you're talking about. And I sent him, it took me 15 minutes. I sent him a dozen different studies that I had in my email box. I sent him a bunch of different links, and he didn't respond. respond, right? But he actually didn't even know about he didn't even know about this. He had no idea, and so he dug in and took this hostile position and accused me of something, not just very uncharitable, but that's a bad accusation to make against somebody who's a writer, right? You're peddling dangerous misinformation. I knew what the next step was, right? We'd probably go to my employer at Grove City College and say, your employee is writing columns peddling dangerous misinformation. He didn't even know what he was talking about. He had no idea. But this is the world we're living in.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. I wanted to get into asking your opinion about the trucker rally, but we are out of time. That music means we got to go. Dr. Paul Kengor, thank you for being on with us today. We always appreciate our conversations with you.
Anytime, Joe.
God bless you and God love you. Have a great day, Dr. Kengor. That's going to do it for hour number 1 of Catholic Drive Time.